On the 30th of November 2022, OpenAI launched ChatGPT. Over the next 2 years, Nvidia's market capitalization surpassed Apple, Microsoft, and Saudi Aramco, exceeding $4 trillion. A graphics chip company founded in a Denny's diner had become the most valuable company on Earth. The conventional explanation is artificial intelligence. The real one is a 30-year software bet almost no one noticed being made. On April 5, 1993, Jensen, Huang, Chris Malachowski, and Curtis Preem met at a Denny's in San Jose and signed the incorporation documents for Nvidia. The name came from the Latin word Nvidia, meaning envy, a choice that reflected their ambition to lead in visual computing. The founders left Sun Microsystems to build a new kind of graphics accelerator. Their first product, the NV1, launched in May 1995. The chip used a quadrilateral-based texture pipeline, not the triangle-based standard that Microsoft's DirectX would soon enforce. This technical decision rendered the NV1 incompatible with most new PC games. Sales collapsed within months. By early 1996, Nvidia's cash reserves could cover only one more month of payroll. Internal memos and board minutes confirmed the severity, $125,000 in the bank, and liquidation looming if new funding did not arrive. Facing insolvency, Jensen Huang traveled to Sega's headquarters to negotiate directly with Chief Executive Officer Shoichiro Irimajiri. Sega agreed to convert a $5 million payment for a failed Dreamcast graphics contract into an equity investment. This move gave Nvidia a temporary lifeline and a narrow window to recover. 12 months later, in August 1997, Nvidia released the Riva 128. Unlike the NV1, the Riva adopted a triangle-based pipeline, making it compatible with Direct3D and OpenGL. The market responded immediately. Within 4 months, Nvidia shipped 1 million Riva units, generating $30 million in revenue and restoring the company's financial stability. The success of the Riva 128 established Nvidia as a credible supplier in the graphics chip market and set the stage for the company's next strategic leap. In 2003, a doctoral thesis at Stanford described a new way to use graphics processors for general-purpose computing. The author, Ian Buck, called his prototype Brook. Nvidia hired Buck the following year and assigned him to lead a new software platform. 3 years later, in 2006, Nvidia introduced CUDA, the Compute Unified Device Architecture. CUDA allowed developers to write C-like code that ran directly on Nvidia GPUs, unlocking their parallel processing power for scientific and engineering workloads. The launch coincided with the G80 GPU, but CUDA was not an immediate commercial success. For most of its first decade, CUDA generated little direct revenue. Nvidia's annual reports between 2006 and 2016 show research and development spending rising from $225 million to over $1.2 billion per year. Nearly all of that increase was tied to CUDA and GPU compute libraries. The company's cumulative spend on CUDA exceeded $5.5 billion over 10 years. In early 2013, activist hedge fund Starboard Value took a stake in Nvidia and demanded a reduction in what it called excessive research and development. Starboard's letter to the board specifically targeted CUDA, arguing the project was a drain on capital and should be scaled back in favor of immediate gaming profits. Jensen Huang refused. At the GPU Technology Conference that spring, he stated publicly that cutting CUDA investment would cripple Nvidia's future. The board sided with Huang, and Starboard exited within the year. By 2016, CUDA had become the default programming environment for academic research in machine learning and high-performance computing. Major frameworks like TensorFlow and PyTorch shipped with built-in CUDA support. University courses began to require CUDA proficiency for advanced coursework. The decade-long commitment to software, maintained in the face of investor pressure, established an ecosystem that competitors could not easily replicate. CUDA became the moat around Nvidia's business, locking in developers and research institutions worldwide. In September 2012, 3 researchers at the University of Toronto, Alex Krzyzewski, Ilya Sutskever, and Jeffrey Hinton, trained a deep neural network called AlexNet on 2 Nvidia GTX 580 graphics cards. The training ran for 6 days in a student dormitory. The GPUs were standard consumer hardware purchased through the university's procurement system. Their published paper documented both the hardware and the training time. AlexNet won the ImageNet competition by a wide margin, demonstrating that commodity graphics processors could outperform specialized supercomputers for computer vision tasks. Academic labs around the world began adopting Nvidia GPUs for deep learning experiments. By the following year, Google acquired DNN Research, the group behind AlexNet, and hired Sutskever as a research scientist. This migration of top talent and research capital to GPU-accelerated computing drove institutional demand for Nvidia hardware. Data center revenue, negligible in 2012, reached $2.9 billion United States dollars by fiscal year 2019. The AlexNet breakthrough made CUDA the default environment for scientific computing, and Nvidia's ecosystem became the starting point for nearly every major advance in machine learning. OpenAI launched ChatGPT on November 30, 2022. The model was trained on approximately 10,000 Nvidia A100 graphics processors. Microsoft had placed the order for these GPUs 3 years earlier, securing a dedicated allocation from Nvidia's production line. The contract, disclosed in Microsoft's February 2022 regulatory filing, specified a firm commitment for up to 10,000 units at a price of 28,000 United States dollars per GPU. Shipments began in the first quarter of 2022 and concluded before ChatGPT's public debut. This single order provided the hardware backbone for ChatGPT and the first wave of large language model deployments. Nvidia's data center revenue reflected the scale of this demand. In fiscal year 2023, data center sales reached $15 billion. 12 months later, the figure stood at $47.5 billion, a 217% increase documented in Nvidia's 2024 annual report. Market analysts track the company's valuation in real time. Nvidia crossed the $1 trillion mark on May 30, 2023. It reached $2 trillion on February 23, 2024. $3 trillion followed on June 5. By mid-2025, Nvidia's market capitalization briefly exceeded $4 trillion. These milestones were not driven by speculative enthusiasm alone. They reflected audited revenue and the scale of infrastructure investment by hyperscalers such as Microsoft and OpenAI. The magnitude of hardware orders and the speed at which they translated into revenue forced a wholesale repricing of Nvidia's stock and established the economic scale that its competitive moats would now have to defend. Nvidia's position is anchored by four moats, each reinforcing the others. First, software lock-in. Over 4 million developers have built on CUDA, Nvidia's parallel computing platform, with more than 40 million toolkit downloads since 2006. Major AI frameworks, PyTorch, TensorFlow, and JAX are CUDA optimized, making it costly for organizations to switch hardware. Second, Nvidia's partnership with Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company secures priority access to advanced chipmaking. In 2024, Nvidia became the largest customer of TSMC for 5 and 4 nanometer nodes, surpassing Apple in foundry revenue. This guarantees timely GPU production, while rivals face bottlenecks and delays. Third, Nvidia's control of the networking layer. The $6.9 billion acquisition of Mellanox in April 2020 brought InfiniBand technology, now essential for connecting thousands of GPUs in data centers. This integration gives Nvidia end-to-end command over compute and networking infrastructure. Fourth, hyperscale cloud providers. Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, and Google account for about 40% of Nvidia's data center revenue. These firms receive priority GPU allocation. Smaller companies must rent GPU access from them, creating a feedback loop that locks in demand for Nvidia silicon and sustains recurring infrastructure revenue. Together, these moats create formidable switching barriers. AMD's MI300X matches Nvidia's H100 on raw throughput, but the economics of switching remain punishing. The ROCm developer community is estimated at 2% the size of CUDA. A 2023 analysis cited in technical commentary found that porting a mid-sized AI model from CUDA to ROCm required approximately 1,400 engineer hours. Manual rewrites and debugging accounted for the bulk of this effort, as many CUDA functions lack direct ROCm equivalents. PyTorch and TensorFlow, the two dominant frameworks, ship with 14 CUDA-specific extensions and only 2 for ROCm, reinforcing the disparity in developer support. On GitHub, CUDA-tagged repositories outnumber ROCm by a factor of 50. Hardware parity does not translate to ecosystem parity. Organizations face a steep total cost of ownership when migrating away from CUDA, not just in initial engineering hours, but in ongoing performance tuning and maintenance. The 2020 data center revenue dip of 25%, known as the Pascal pause, revealed the business's sensitivity to cyclical demand and exposed the limits of any single product cycle. Nvidia's reliance on TSMC's advanced node fabrication introduces a further layer of risk. All cutting-edge GPUs are manufactured in Taiwan, concentrating supply chain exposure. Jensen Huang remains founder CEO, holding approximately 3.5% of outstanding shares and overseeing around 60 direct reports. The company does not disclose a formal succession plan. Analysts flag this as a material governance risk, given the centralization of decision-making and the absence of a clear leadership pipeline. Sustaining a $4 trillion valuation depends not only on technical moats, but on the ability to manage these operational and governance vulnerabilities. Today, every major data center and AI startup depends on CUDA's proprietary stack, an ecosystem built over decades, not months. The cost to switch remains prohibitive. Nvidia's valuation reflects structural control, not just demand surges. In modern markets, software lock-in outlasts any news cycle. Share your thoughts below.